I'm glad that I'm invited to give a talk on about the writing of history in the talk series, lecture series, the Swatantra Bharat 75. I would like to say at the beginning that history has been written by various persons, particularly who have invaded our country. And obviously, history written by those persons is to help them to rule India. It is biased, it is distorted. So I think that I should say something about the writing of history, giving some examples. The desire to know about past is the natural instinct of man. That is why some sort of history has been recorded by almost all countries. But a scientific, ordered, and systematic study of history began only in the 19th century. The history recorded till then suffered from a number of defects, such as a non-critical approach, the study of a limited area if a country is as vast as India, and yet conclusions are drawn, and religious and moral interpretations neglecting the natural causes. The causation theory, to interpret history in a rather systematic way, historians adopted some theories like the causation theory, the theory of divine plan, the rationalist theory, the national character theory, the theory of human emotions, etc. Of these, the craze for the Marxian theory was much in demand, particularly in the 20th century. For a while, it became popular amongst the intelligentsia. Some others advocate the pluralistic school. This school of historians rejected the notion that history was merely a chronicle of important events and the deeds of the prominent men. They insisted that history must deal with social, cultural, political, and economic development. In other words, they tended to emphasize that there were many probable causes for a development in history rather than a single cause. Muzumdar writes it in his curriculum. Obviously, this theory would make history more comprehensive rather than any of the above referred to. There is another one, the imprint of the time. As the record of history evolves a subjective element, the history conceived or written in a particular period bears the imprint of the times. Viewing the impact of environment on the historian, it can be adduced that Grandeur viewed the history of the Maratha from the point of view of an army officer or the Chinese Buddhist traveler of the 6th century of Common Era or the Tawari in the court of the Muslim ruler, writing about this whaler. There is no point in making which point of view is right. Each viewpoint was the only probable possible for the man who adopted it. Professor Cohen is right when he says that Aristotle would not have composed his works if he had been elsewhere than in Greece of 4th century of Common Era. On these lines, it can be stated that Peshwa Bhagirav I could not have achieved the success defeating all his enemies unless the ground was prepared for him by Chhatrapati Shivaji and others. In the same vein, one can say that those who have twisted ancient Indian history in favor of feudalism could not have sanctioned their thoughts if they were born before Karl Marx. Similarly, Arya and Bukharai, the founders of the Anagundi Empire, could do that because there was a growing feeling among the people against Muslim rule. People had strong anti-invaders feeling and were clamoring for peace, order, and safety. The people felt that these brothers alone could ensure them peace, self-respect, liberty, and religious freedom. History is written time and again according to the notion of the writer. In Orthodox would not give importance to the material progress that the society has achieved, or the Marxist would write it in a way favorable to his principles. We witness that often history is tailored to suit the deeds of the rulers or ruling country. A loyalist of the British Raj would eulogize the rule of the East India Company, howsoever oppressive it was from the Indian point of view. And to justify his writings, he would try to prove that the Indians were uncivilized savages and they themselves had come as saviors. When one has to go through such writings of history, one should take care to know the attitude and aptitude of the writer, the situation in which it was written, writer's philosophy of history, and above all, his capacity to guard the happenings of history and to visualize those in their proper perspective. Yes, some historians have written history for history's sake. That is, unbiased and impartial. Some of them have initially thought of a vast canvas encompassing the whole of India, but failed to grasp the historical happenings in their entirety. While some have drawn their conclusions related to entire country, though based on a data of a limited area. Studying the situation in the North India and making a sweeping remarks pertaining to entire country obviously is defective and hence partial, or at least inadequate. For instance, in view of the works of B.D. Chattopadhyay and Champakalakshmi, the theory of feudalism cannot be applicable to the entire country. For, to a large extent, the feudal model is ineffective in the case of peninsular India. Therefore, it is required of the historian to refrain from making sweeping remarks related to India as a whole, unless the historical setting in significant geographical and linguistic regions is taken into consideration. For under the Cholas in the south, there was brisk commercial intercourse with China, Sumatra, and Java in the east, and Arabia and other countries around the Persian Gulf in the west. Some merchant guilds were gigantic international organizations, industries were in a flourishing condition, and public revenue was collected also in cash. Moreover, the local self-government was functioning with the help of the Mahasabha, members of which were elected. This information is available in number of inscriptions found in Tondamandalam and Cholamandalam. Very high qualifications regarding age, learning capacity to carry work of continue effectively and more integrity, that too, not only of oneself but also of one's relations were prescribed and implemented very strictly. Besides, Tanjavur, the Cholas had built cities like Kanchi and Gangaikonda. In short, in the case of India, one should keep in mind that it is practically difficult to write comprehensive history, giving justice to all the regions, for the status of various aspects of culture is not alike everywhere. To know and comprehend adequately the political, social, economic, and cultural status of various states in India, a writer of a very high acumen is needed, even if the data and sources are high. Let us agree that the historians have their limitations to have access to information from various sources, limitation of understanding situation accurately, of knowing the subtlety of sources obtained and interpreting those, of traditions and customs of the people of whom history is being written. Some examples I feel are necessary to elucidate this. One of my Andhra students published his thesis, which he dedicated to his father Gopal Krishna Gokhale. Initially, I was shocked reading this dedication, and after a while, I realized that in Andhra Pradesh, name of a renowned dignity of a marquis is given to a newborn without breaking it. I could comprehend this as I had my classmates when I was doing my master's in Usman University at Hyderabad, whose names were Chhatrapati Shivaji and Jhansi Rani Lakshmi. Both were Andhras. Another classic example I can quote is of a foreign writer. The antiquarian studies, mainly in the form of reporting and documentation of the various artifactual evidences, owed its inception to the officials of the British Raj. But apropos to the religious imagery, its discovery by the West is an altogether different story. From the end of 17th century of the Common Era, the Europeans started thinking of iconography of the Hindu deities, but they were unable to come to terms with these unusual images and describe them as demons, or monsters. This was probably due to the utter ignorance of the Indian mythological tradition. They were unable to grasp the concept of these multi-armed and polycephalous images. Gradually, such biased and opinionated viewpoints begin to undergo some transformations, resulting in some systematic studies of Indian religious and mythological traditions, which consequently provided the key to the understanding of Indian iconography. Yet another example, though somewhat funny, is of Lady Mayo. She wrote that Indians eat leaves of some tree and spit blood everywhere and anywhere. This could only happen when the customs are not known or understood properly. Yet another point I wish to stress is that history of the conquered written by the conquerors is obviously bound to be different than the one written by indigenous writers. Many examples can be cited in this regard. The British in the 17th, 18th centuries have written on the history of India, though their works were based on the sources available. Their interpretations of these were to defend their rule in India. So they projected India and the Indians as backward. Their thoughts were not noble, their behavior not gentle, their social and political institutions were of low standard, and they were uncultured. According to Vincent Smith, Indian history cannot be taken beyond 7th century BC, presumably because he wanted to suggest that the civilization of the subcontinent is not very ancient. However, the discovery of the Indian civilization has proved him wrong. Moreover, he thought that it was a history of defeat. In fact, it should be taken as a history of struggles, particularly when the context of countries who lost their existence due to the avalanche of enemies. It also can be happened when history is written for the rulers ruling over the subjects belonging to different religions than theirs. The Indian history provides many instances in this regard. This happens when it is of defensive nature and the rulers of an alien religion have to prove themselves meritorious, cultured, etc. What is objectionable from the pure historical point of view is defending such writings by distorting the historical facts and interpret things which have no strong and undeniable basis. For instance, to say that the Muslim invaders had not dismantled or destroyed temples because of religious bigotry, but to loot the treasures hidden or amassed in the temples, is intentional twisting of the facts in the light of the fatwas issued by Aurangzeb ordering dismantling of temples. Moreover, while doing this, it is forgotten that the invaders like themselves to be called Butchakar. And in any case, historians should not forget that attacking to demolish a religious edifice is immoral and criminal. Arnold Gitaindi, a world-famous historian who penned the 10-volume History of History, the study of history, has this to say. Aurangzeb had a veritable genius for picking out provocative sites. He spent a lifetime of hard labor in raising massive monuments to his own discredit. His was a policy that brought his empire to ruin, besides discrediting the emperor himself. History written by its own people is very important in this context. History should be as impartial as possible. Otherwise, it would be either one-sided or biased. That's why it is better if it is written by its own people. Take, for example, history of Vijayanagar. When a foreign historian Swain wrote about it, the title given was A Forgotten Empire, while an Indian historian like Venkataramanayya would like to call it Never to be Forgotten. This kind of difference in approach would be there. Another glaring example is to be found related to the history of Chhatrapati Shivaji. The Europeans did not realize initially that Shivaji was fighting for the freedom of the Hindus from the onslaught of the fanatic Muslim kings. They call him al-Murada, a robber, and whatnot. Contemporary Englishmen condemn him as a pirate that hath no regard to friend nor foe, God or man. Sir John Seeley and even Vincent Smith, a distinguished English historian who spent his whole active career in India, has nothing better to say than the Maratha independent rule was the rule of professed robbers. But this mountain rat of Aurangzeb was a lion of the mountains. He turned lambs into lions, according to veteran historian Balakrishnan. He has this to say about Shivaji Maharaj. I quote, poor, downtrodden, fatalistic masses of Maharashtra were galvanized by his magic touch into superhuman activities, daredevils, consummate generals, to match the mighty Mughals, the heroes of 100 days. Sir Jagannath Sarkar says, Shivaji's most precious legacy was the spirit that he breathed into the race. Another point I wish to make is that with new researches, the statements in history, if necessary, are to be reconsidered to effect new changes. For instance, Jagannath Sarkar's statements regarding the achievements of Aurangzeb in the Deccan have been refuted by an equally conversant authority in Persian language, Setu Madar of Mugli. According to him, Sarkar has credited to the Mughals victories they did not win, forts they did not take, and territories they did not annex. Recently, I have come across an illustrated article titled Rethinking Nero of Robert Draper. The author has this to say about him, into comma. He may have presided over the burning of Rome, but he never fiddled. And now some scholars say he was not all bad. Let us wait for some more light on this character. Here is another example, though not directly related to history, but to the historic monument like the Sun Temple of Pune. After the documents pertaining to the building of the edifice were discovered, Alice Bonner authored a book named New Light on the Sun Temple of Pune, has this to say. These documents, which contain a large amount of circumstantial evidence on the origin and history of the Pune temple, should be able to remove any doubt, clear certain controversial points, and thus dispel various erroneous notions which appear to have gained ground, if one is to judge from publications of recent years. First of all, the assumption that the temple was never finished and given over to worship, and secondly, the idea that an edifice of the magnitude could never have been completed in the short time of less than 13 years without the employment of slave labor. To put all in a nutshell, I quote both. The historian's duty is to separate the true from the false, the certain from the uncertain, and the doubtful from that which cannot be accepted. Every investigator must be, before all things, look upon himself as one who is summoned or served on a jury. He has only to consider how far the statement of the case is complete and clearly set forth by the evidence. Then he draws his conclusion and gives his vote, whether it be that his opinion coincides with that of the foreman or not. Friends, let me say something more about the history of our country. History has been always partial to the conqueror, whoever it is, but natural. I would like to say that the facts should not be destroyed or disturbed. This interpretation may be varied. For instance, when Muslims attacked and distorted the Hindu shrines, it was not to loot, particularly when the invaders posed themselves as Butchikar. Romila Thapar, who is popular amongst leftists, interpreted that these attacks were not an act of to plunder treasures and jewelry in the temple. This distortion of facts is unhistorical. It was to please some tantamounting to appeasement. President of the National Congress, Pattabhi Sitaramaiah, while defending the act of heinous destruction of Kashi Vishwanath temple, invented a story of a Rajput queen who was troubled and tortured by the priest Aurangzeb. To punish these dismantled the temple. This is ridiculous. This was to defend Aurangzeb's cruel act only to appease Muslim community, and later on, shamelessly, he admitted that this these two renowned socialist leaders from Puri. Biased historians play another trick. They hide important information or role played by some influential personalities. In the history of past independence, very precious roles of Lokmanya Gangadhar Tilak, swatantra Savarkar, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose have not been described effectively. Just casual reference is made about their contribution to the freedom movement. Because of Gandhiji's obstinate denial of exchange of population at the time of partition, the country lakhs of Hindus were murdered and thousands of them lost their property. History doesn't give due place to this genocide in that younger generation would realize as to how the leaders of the helm of affairs were short-sighted, who could not visualize the characteristics of enemy of whom our history has sufficiently walked. We should learn which history teaches us we failed to do that. Just now, we all are witness to a film known as Kashmir Files. There is a lot of discussion now going on. The blame is given to this party, that party. Some say that this is one-sided recording or filming. My point would be, as a historian, whether this has happened or not. If this is happened, because of whom this has happened, because of whose negligence this has happened, that apart. But the fact is that there was a genocide of Kashmiri Pandits, not exodus. It was exodus after genocide. So one should be very clear in noting down the historical facts. We know that, though it was not made in such a way to know the people at large. It was kept hidden. It's okay. But when film is there, one should know that this has happened. This was a genocide. Pandits in lakhs of number had to leave Kashmir and be in Jammu and other parts of India. This is the fact. But if the things which had happened 30 years back are distorted, I think history would not tolerate, history would not keep, it would not pass on us. So this is what I say, something regarding the writing of history. I think that there are many more examples to be given, but within the limited period, I have put forth what sort of history has made me so far, what is the role of history, and what is the role of historians. Thank you.